Come on. There we go. Hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to one half of this, which is RPG with DBJ, and the other half, which is an illustrious guest on this channel, this side of the channel, and I'm glad to be invited on into your world as well. For those who don't know, there are a ton of excellent indie creators out there, especially that orbit the gravity of the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group. And it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you and to talk with you about your project. So please, without further ado, please introduce yourself because right now we are actually um, broadcasting and streaming together on either of both of our channels. So this is an opportunity for me to experience the love that you get on your side of the table as well. So please take it away.
Hey everybody, my name is Marquise Hardis. I'm one half of the Shardstone Assembly, along with my illustrious creative partner, who unfortunately could not make it tonight, Andy Alexandro. I've been basically writing for a pretty long time now, doing game design, novels, poetry, all kinds of stuff, mixing in here, getting my degree and all kinds of stuff like that. Currently, what we're doing is doing Scavenger and Skullbox and some other things as well that we're trying to build up, and new settings for not only D&D 5e, but trying to build a greater and bigger IP and brand that I personally think can really expand to a lot of different amazing media as we're going forward. So
Ooh, you just opened up a little skull box on me with that little comment there with other media. Okay, so let's let's take a step back in time a little bit here. Okay, now um, being an individual on the receiving end of your creative process, you seem extremely prolific when it comes to expressing your ideas, and and I say this in a great way, like a chef experimenting. They have an idea of what they want to create, and then allowing others to take part in it. You when you make a post in the Facebook group, it's not three lines. It's like intellectual goodness. It just makes a person think. It feels like being invited into another world. How are you able to produce that kind of uh, intellectual thinking and still have time to leave space to produce the things that you are already producing?
oh man, I wish I had a better answer for you because sometimes I don't know how I do it myself. If I could keep it to three lines, I'd probably be better for timetables. But for me, the creative process is what I like to do, or how I like to describe it as, is I envision or I dream something, and then I'm just trying to communicate the idea of that dream. And in the process of the communication of the dream, I'm deconstructing it essentially. I'm looking at what the waves and the ripples of that dream are and how it might intersect with other things. Because ultimately, in anything I'm trying to do in my writing, is to capture a kind of truth about the human experience and really about life overall through a lot of different medium. And I like to kind of take that and play with it and see what if. What would it be like if, there were cataclysms that were running across the world and how that changed cultures or how that affect religion and this, that, and the other. That usually leads to me kind of dipping my hands into a whole bunch of different subjects and a lot of different research. And as I'm doing these research, especially maybe like watching like PBS Space Time on YouTube or something, I just start coming up with ideas because I start thinking, what would happen if I took these things and I just applied them in this context? If I took this and I put this in a normal fantasy world with elves, or if I took this and I put this in a more scientific world, what do the different lights or lenses or perspectives do to the idea that I'm coming up with?
Yeah. There's a great question in the chat, and because I before we get into the concept of Shardstone Assembly and then what you're creating there, and it deals very much with this question, which I will post in just a second. Um, the, as a meta thought today, now there isn't any separation between creators and the people who get that creation now. A ton of like classic Dungeons and Dragons writers from first edition till today are their own brand, and they communicate with their own uh, customers, their own followers, their fans and such. And one of the things I see now from you is this ability to put your ideas out there, knowing that they will be dissected, and by doing so, I feel like people are fans of you because you do that. It's like being it's like improv on a stage. It's scary, and it can be embarrassing, and you can stumble over things of like words and actions and look idiotic, but I think people appreciate that from you. So you don't, because I find no one seems to be critical of how you're doing it. They're critical of the idea you create, not of you yourself. And I'm amazed by that. And the comment, Zamara is a consistent a co-host on my channel, says, "Have you run across times where words have failed in communicating your dreams? Like, how do you work around it?" Uh, I,
So I have run into those situations before. First off, hey Zamaria, glad you're here. So when I was younger, especially, I would run into this issue more and more, and I still run into this issue now. But my way around it is I have to keep rewriting and doing editing. The biggest thing about any kind of writing will always be you have to look at it again, sometimes a week later, sometimes months later, and completely redo it, sometimes from scratch. Many times I've taken an idea or a dream of mine and I've completely thrown it out and started it over, or I revisit it and then edit it, and then I was like, nah, I gotta start it over again. So it does happen that sometimes the words do fail me, and I'm not always completely satisfied with the first time when I put something down, but through the constant process of polishing it and ruminating on it, and then looking at other possible lenses that I can look through that idea under, allows me to basically kind of bloom or blossom the idea or the dream into something that more captures what I'm looking at. Also, I read a lot, and that helps a lot.
now, I want to segue into the Shardstone Assembly in a larger umbrella, and then absolutely get into Scavenger, which is what maybe you've talked about it quite a bit, but I haven't got a chance to bother you about it. So I'd really like to get into it with you. So Shardstone Assembly, explain to me what that is.
So Shardstone Assembly started kind of after the idea because we started officially, me and Andy, when we had finished our first Kickstarter for Scavenger. We were thinking, what do we want to name ourselves? How do we want to go about our branding in the future? And what is it exactly we want to do? So to answer directly your question, Shardstone Assembly is essentially me and Andy making a bunch of art projects and trying to expand them through different ways while also making them playable games for people. I'm a big believer that in interacting with high quality creative content, you yourself can basically, through all kind of osmosis, absorb a lot of those ideas and become more creative yourself, or hopefully and be inspired by what we're putting down. So what we're really looking to do with Shardstone Assembly is essentially to make things that are, on one hand, very fun to play, of course, and on the other hand, things that when you read or interact or see it, it inspires more ideas inside of you.
Cool, cool. Now let's go into Scavenger. All right, and if you don't mind, I have the Scavenger Sketchbook.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
so all right, so if you allow me to, oops, there we go. Let's open this up here. And it should be right here. Okay.
Mhm.
Let me go into Scavenger Sketchbook and kind of let's get these images here, expand them out just a little bit. There's a little bit of a visual imagery as you
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
Scavenger, if you don't mind. Uh, yeah, it's a little new to me. These kind of things are a little bit new to me,
Mhm.
but th- the image. Okay, I'm going to say this, and it's going to come across politically, and I
Uh-huh.
don't mean it this way, but uh, as you know, we're dreadheads, man, and
Yeah, yeah.
we love ourselves. I, I have a desire to be in worlds that are expansive, and I love people who are able to maybe express their culture in role playing games or express their imaginations and dreams of role playing games. But Dungeons and Dragons, as basically the world's most popular role playing game, has made things very like neo European, neo medieval, and I love settings that are not that. Not that I dislike medieval settings. What I'm saying is, I like choice. I like going to, I like going, when I get a scoop of ice cream, I like a lot of flavors and get to pick from any of them. And I really appreciate where Scavenger has come in terms of of your language and the imagery and that kind of thing. So you tell me, what is Scavenger to you? And give a little bit of the background and settings for people who don't know what Scavenger is.
So first, to explain a little bit more about Scavenger, which you can see here with Andy's amazing art, Scavenger is, I think, the best way to put it, a Bronze Age science fantasy, which is kind of a lot to unpack there. So to kind of dig deeper into it, it takes place on a planet that is a little bit smaller than Earth and a little bit closer to the sun. So the environments are a little bit different, and evolution has been a little bit different. About maybe 50 to 65 years ago, this massive building called the Monolith, which you can see right there, opened up in the city-state of Tarnak. When it opened up, the Tarnaki went through the building, and what they found on the other side was a completely another different world. A world where these strange, almost hyperdimensional, magical, and science fantasy things are present. These impossible phenomena that were so drastic and also, at the time, so lethal and scary that the only thing that Tarnaki could call this place was a world torn apart, or torn colloquially now for short. Coming out of Torn were these things called Shardstones, these red gemstones that when you see them, they draw you to them almost psionically. They infect your mind, making you want to ruminate upon them. And upon ruminating on them, you're able to understand them and you feel bonded to them. And then by using Shardstones, either through cutting them or image practices or mysticism, Akarans were able to create essentially the first magical effects, the first, or as they call it, hyperdimensional effects, which is essentially their term for anything that goes kind of transcending space and time. And through these Shardstones, these people who were going into Torn, which became known as scavengers, became more and more powerful. And as things kept coming out of Torn, Tarnak itself became to change. And then 10 years ago, things got weird. There started being these natural disasters, these earthquakes that were on such a horrendous scale that cities would be swallowed, or these heat rays, or these massive blobs of heat that would roll across the savannah and just wipe out thousands or even tens of thousands, or sometimes unprecedented millions of creatures at once. This mass extinction event is called either the Great Dying or the Cataclysm, and that's really at the heart of Scavenger. These scavengers have a dying world all around them, and the only kind of clue they have to finding out what's happening, or the only hope they have of finding a place to go that isn't dying, is Torn. And so the story of Scavenger is essentially the story of these Bronze Age people who have to deal with this very strange, advanced, and magical, again, hyperdimensional things going on in Torn that are also affecting them and changing them and evolving them. And so to answer the other part of the question, which is what does Scavenger mean to me? Scavenger is not just a fun idea for me to play with. It is also kind of the vessel that I put in all of my different creative ideas that I polish over the years, my understandings of the human experience, and is also communicating my overall kind of artistic thesis about what it means to be a person who is living through very turbulent times. In some ways, you could kind of see Scavenger as almost an answer to my not trauma, but like my dealings with the world of modern 2021, which, as everyone knows, has been a pretty difficult year these last couple of years. But it's also more than that, because I like to examine hope. And beyond that, I like to examine more esoteric things, like what is human culture? How do human cultures come about and change? What are languages? How do these languages and these linguistics impact like their view of reality and all that other stuff? So it's kind of dealing a lot with basically what it means to be human, but also you have all these different things going on, like the Great Dying and the evolutions, the mutations, and all that stuff.
That is awesome. And I, it seems like the the growth process from Scavenger has now bled over into um, another project. What I think is your most recent project. Please correct me. Is Torn and Beyond. And at first, and I knew I was wrong when I read it. I was like, oh, so maybe this is the material that didn't make it into Scavenger. So this would just be like a small project on its own. And then I realized, like, no, no, no. Scavenger was the small project, and Torn and Beyond is the huge dream, which is awesome. But so now that Torn and Beyond is in your sights, what is it? I mean, how has it grown compared to how you've grown from leaving Scavenger, moving into Torn and Beyond?
So, oh man, it's been a lot. So sometimes I look back when I'm reading through like the PDF of Scavenger, and I'm like, man, I wish I had my Torn and Beyond ideas 2 years ago when I was writing this. Torn and Beyond is the next book that me and Andy are doing. You can consider almost like a sequel to Scavenger. If Scavenger is the flavor and the general rules and the introduction to the setting, you can think of Torn and Beyond as not the entire point of the setting, but it's a big point of the setting. Torn and Beyond is, for me, I think, probably my, and I don't want to sound too like weird when I say this, but it's kind of the magnum opus I've been working on for many years now. All of my artistic endeavors have essentially been leading to Torn and Beyond. So to talk more about what it is, Torn and Beyond is three things. Of course, it's a deeper dive into the world of Torn. It also is going to be opening up our Scavenger multiverse, which you are calling the Beyond. And then it's also, the second thing is, it is a expansive epic of a campaign that you can play as either, one shots, trilogies, mini campaigns, or you can make into this great sprawling multi-year thing as you want. In Torn and Beyond, you'll be examining not only what it means to be in Torn, but you'll be answering many of the mysteries that are in Torn, which is things like these megalithic ruins that fill it. Who were these Zenith people that used to live there? What happened to them? Is what happened to them the same thing that's happening to Akara? These other monoliths that we see in Torn and Beyond, in Torn, where do they lead? Do they lead to safe worlds? And one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and forgive me, Andy, for talking about it here, we get to talk about my favorite thing, which is this being that we just simply call the entity, which is this very powerful, almost eldritch and alien, hard to understand thing that communicates through dreams and prophecies and through shardstones, that speaks to scavengers and is slowly learning what it means to be a living thing, and is hinting at it itself being many of the answers that the scavengers are looking for, and is offering many of the answers that scavengers are looking for. But with everything it offers, of course, is always a price, but that price is not something like a devil for existence, for example. It's not like you're making a contract, or it's not like you're dealing with the Fae, where you have these weird, strange things happening that are very impressionistic. It's very much an examination of the core of the human experience, what it means to evolve and to connect with others, and furthermore, what it means when something truly has tremendous power and comes into contact with people who don't even have a working scientific method yet, despite being hyper advanced itself. Okay. So these kinds of things are what we'll be looking to pursue inside of Torn and Beyond.
Awesome. So this is bringing to me a number of images, almost as if the scavengers are now becoming almost like I don't. This might be the incorrect descriptor, but like planeswalkers, like leaving their home to like forever leave their homes to travel to other worlds, possibly, or even meeting other cultures pulled from their worlds, or going through similar events where their worlds are being torn apart, and then coalescing together in these new realms or something. Am I making any sense?
You hit the nail on the head, DBJ. I'm so
Okay.
impressed. That's
Okay.
exactly
Okay.
what it is. I would
Now,
have to go ahead.
no, well, I'm sorry. I was going to say because you're so introspective, um, will will that reflect in the worlds that other people world or worlds that other people will visit in the context of Torn and Beyond.
It definitely will. A big thing that I think that I'm very proud of when it comes to my art is my ability to make people have those kinds of same introspective thoughts, even if they may go down a new direction or what have you. So when it comes to Torn and Beyond, when people come into contact with it, what I
Mhm.
want them to see is not only my own ideas, which I have laid out in the text and that Andy has painted himself, but I also want them to think about what else could be in the beyond. What else could it mean to change in this way? And to kind of hit on something you had just said a moment ago with the Planeswalker idea, I think a good way of thinking about it is scavengers are a mixture of a Planeswalker and a refugee story, essentially. And with every refugee story, you always have that place that you're trying to go to that's never quite what you think it is. And you're always trying to partially get back home as well. So these are the kinds of things I also want to inspire inside of people and kind of show them different perspectives that exist, but within our fantasy context.
Now, in this is a comment that I absolutely agree with. That Samara says, like, Scavenger also gives me very deep animistic vibes, as well as like a light African one. Um, I was going to say, what made you do um, this being a type of Bronze Age? What made you desire to put it in this kind of context? Afro Mediterranean, Middle Eastern styled of culture and flavor.
One of the things that both me and Andy are most obsessed with is what was human life like before our current modern history, going back more than even 3 or 4 or 5,000 years ago. There's something I once read, which was this king of Sumer he created this museum essentially back in the ancient day that was made of things that he himself had essentially scavenged or found, almost as if he was like an archaeologist, and he himself was positing what were people like 5,000 years before him, 3,000 years before him? What was it like in the dawn of humanity, which, as we all know, did start in the Horn of Africa and spread out from there? And so, looking at those same ideas, I felt like with Scavenger, which is very much so about the dawn of humanity being combined with the very deepest futures of humanity, it made the most sense for me to want to focus on cultures that were basically close to that context. And while nothing in Scavenger is one-to-one, and I'm very careful not to make anything one-to-one, the African inspirations and the Middle Eastern inspirations and the Indian inspirations and even the Mediterranean inspirations are very important to Scavenger, because by looking at those cultures and those histories, I was basically able to kind of find common threads that then let me go ahead and create or synthesize the cultures and the greater idea of Scavenger and Akara.
Okay. If you don't mind, I actually have the Scavenger book open. If you don't mind me
Oh, go ahead, please.
replacing replacing one with the other. All right, let's see here. Let's close this down, and I will go. I will get the other screen here. There we go. I'll share this out, and got to come back and open up. There we go. All right. Um, and I'll page through this as well while we have a little discussion here. Did I pick the proper page view? I think I did. It's a single page. Nope, it's a double page. Okay. Sorry about that. Wanted to make sure. Um, Now, for some reason, it reminds me of. I get images of, like, before, when the Earth was a single continent before the splitting. Um, it makes me think of, like, before the Earth split and there were land bridges and culture. Like, there wasn't really multiple cultures. It was kind of like this hodgepodge of humanity, um, trying to learn what itself was before it was divided enough for us to recognize what we think of it today. If that if I'm imagining the way you've described it.
That definitely makes sense. That is a big element of it. I would say that, and this is kind of a partially unofficial thing, but probably maybe about 1,000 years is what I would currently put modern occurrence civilization. In that 1,000 years, humans have begun to evolve and change in different ways and develop their cultures. They did get to the point where there were city states and all that kind of thing. And unfortunately, because of the Great Dying, most of the stuff that existed before those 1,000 years, and even that was made during these 1,000 years, is being very rapidly lost. So the kind of idea I was going for is that very recently it was that hodgepodge, and then humans and the other species, which are the pith and the morgue, were finally starting to, I guess, make their way through the world, starting to settle the world. But right as they begin to settle it, here we go with the cataclysm and the great dying, which comes right after they make this great discovery of these magical hyperdimensional shardstones and everything. So it's kind of almost cyclical in that way, in that you have the hodgepodge was pretty recent, as you put it, and then we start getting to the visions of humanity, and then very rapidly things are coalescing back again as people flee or try to get to Tarnak because their own homelands are basically being wiped out or destroyed or what have you.
All right. Um, this is just a personal editorial thing that I love when I read like a setting book or a creator's vision, and that's the idea of the unreliable narrator. And I like one of my favorite science fiction books actually is written by an unreliable narrator, which is Eclipse Phase. It's like a transhumanist sci-fi thing.
Love
I,
Eclipse Phase.
I've had a number of cyberpunk games that are written by unreliable narrators, and of course, the unreliable narrator is a type of literary style where the world is described by one or more individuals, either like past, present, or future, within that world from their point of view with their opinions. What like is it easier for you to imagine your setting through these individuals? Did you go back and forth about deciding whether you were going to use unreliable narrators? And uh and side note, do you kind of like regret it, or are you moving away from that? Just take me through that thought process.
So when it comes to the writing style of Scavenger, to take a step back, when I was finishing my master's degree, I was trying to come up with a way that would allow someone to not only understand from the outside, but at the inside simultaneously, essentially, of the setting itself. I felt like it was very important that people would be able to understand Akara through the lens of Akarans, given that it is expected people would be role playing in here and everything. But I also wanted it to be clear enough for people to understand. So what ended up happening is I ended up coming with a writing style that basically relies a little bit on the second person, so using you a lot, essentially, to try and ground you into it, with the idea being that I'm directly talking to you as if I am an Akaran, even though I'm not an Akaran, but I'm speaking in such a way that it's almost as if I was like a chronicler or a historian or what have you. In terms of being difficult, I wouldn't say it's difficult for me really anymore. At first, it was very hard to get the right balance. It took me a good bit of time to kind of figure out how to make it read well. And even since Scavenger came out, I have improved on it even more for Torn and Beyond. I haven't dropped the U for Torn and Beyond, but I have dialed it back a little bit since it is also, partially an adventure and everything. But when you're reading it, you'll get the same feel as when you read Scavenger, which is you're talking to an Akaran, or Akaran is dictating to you what their reality is like, to share with you their perspectives and their experiences.
That's awesome, dude. I th- th- there's a couple reasons why I really love that. Um, I guess you what did you call like second person
Yeah.
writing, and what there's a couple of reasons. One of them is the fact that simply put, it feels like you're in the world. It feels like you're sitting around a campfire or across a table, or you're riding across a lonely road, and this individual's talking to you about this world. It also, like you said, because it's through the point of view of someone who has an opinion. Um, it it allows myself and other people to form their opinions based on the person's opinion that is talking to them, right? So like someone, the unreliable part of it, I think, is the best part, because they may have, for example, a fear or a desire or a hatred or trauma or dreams about a particular location or individual or monsters or an event or something, and then I can listen to it and go, I don't believe them, or I see where they're coming from, or I bet somebody else has a different opinion about it. And I think the last thing too is it feels like there's space for me to be creative, um, because of that second person literary technique you've used. Like it feels like there's space in there for me to go to believe or not believe the things that I'm hearing, to place my own value in it as a person who may want to run the game, or um, find some hidden trinket in there, especially when the narrator uses things like words like always, never, where in real life you're like, well, always and never, really, you know. So I really appreciate that. So it works. I
I'm
get it.
glad it works. That is, and you exactly hit on the biggest thing I wanted to get through that writing style, which was I was trying to think of a way. What is the best way for me to get across the flavor of this setting, giving my page count and not wanting to just write, like 300 pages of just, dry text or what have you. So I felt that by showing you how these people think, you would have a better understanding of the world. And on top of that, like you said, you can make your own conclusions and essentially modify or interpret, I think is a better word here, Scavenger as you want to do it. There's a comment here that is very, very accurate too from Zomara about the storytelling approach.
Mm-hmm.
The great Tori Morrison, rip, I miss her. She said that she writes in a way that you are supposed to read her writing aloud. And that kind of African tradition that she was drawing on is the very same thing that inspired me when I was writing Scavenger. Whenever I'm writing, I literally will take a chapter or a page or what have you, and this sounds a little conceited, I will basically perform it to myself until I have it sounding right in the way that it will sound as if you were really talking to someone or having someone share with you those oral traditions and those stories from generations past.
That's awesome. That is really cool, because I'm part of me is a little bit nervous that when you're moving into Torn and Beyond, like I kind of don't want you to leave the old stuff behind, but I do agree with
It's
Dante
still
that,
there.
like, yeah, that's like if you see it from a different angle. I mean, if you think about it, that's is essentially George R. R. Martin's sweet spot, right? Where he you you encounter the story from one person's point of view, and then you end up coming back to that scene from a different person's point of view, and then the person who was offended becomes the hero. And I'm really into really into that. So it's awesome. Now let's segue a little bit away from this, even though we're looking at it, to Skullbox, because um, that is a departure dramatically from this kind of creativity, and I think this is more emblematic of Shardstone. So explain to the participants what that is.
So Skullbox is fun to start there. So we did our Kickstarter for Skullbox earlier this year. Now you can get it for sale if you want to on Exalted Funeral, or you can get the PDF over on our site. Skullbox is a short game. It's a 60-page game or so that is essentially an ode to the old punk scenes of the 80s and 90s. And also it draws on a lot of, for me personally, the cartoons that I watched growing up that for me were very influential in ways I didn't realize until I finally sat down to write Skullbox. If you do end up reading Skullbox, which I'll describe in more detail in a second, it does read a lot like Scavenger in the sense that if you read it aloud, that's kind of the intention as well. But it's a very punky, not aggressive. Well, yeah, it is aggressive. A very punky, aggressive, anti-establishment kind of thing, where essentially you play as these floating disembodied skulls who live inside of a dungeon. You just recently came alive to life by the powers of a golden apple of discord. And now these no good do-gooders, these raiders from Everbliss, are basically coming to take the golden apple of discord and anything else they can take out of the dungeon that you live in. The core idea having originally been that like you're the people in the dungeon trying to fight the heroes coming into the dungeon, but I wanted to put some twist onto it. So with Skullbox, you have these skulls, you have these boxes that you go into, which are magical. And when you go into a box, it's kind of like a class. It gives you these really weird powers. And then with those weird powers and also some very psychotic traps, you end up basically making your own dungeon. And as the waves of raiders come in, until eventually their boss, the St. Queen Sophronia, comes in, you're annihilating them essentially. And it doesn't have to be anything like super violent, like, oh, I'm slaughtering everybody. Because it draws on those cartoon ideas, you can very easily play it as like, we're just beating them up or giving them a really bad day. And at the end of the day, we are destroying Everbliss. There's no way around that one. Everbliss has to be taken out and put into the skull box, aka made a place where these do-gooders will not come to take your golden apple of discord anymore. The artist for it is different. It is a Romanian artist named Gospo, who's a very close friend with Andy. And it was Andy who basically brought us together, and Andy did the layout for it. And Gospo just drew the most magical, and when you see the boxes, it just evokes everything. Like you see it and you get it. It's like that is so punk, cartoonish, and it makes you just want to be wild and chaotic. And that is essentially Skullbox in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me of like currently now there's this great resurgence of, like you said, like 80s punk. One game that comes to mind is Morkborg, Ultraviolet Grasslands.
All
And
big
I
inspiration.
really love that. But so now, because as I'm paging through Scavenger here, and the participants that are seeing this visually are able to see a lot of the artwork. How the hell were you able to find A, artists that are this good, and B, artists that can encompass the flavor of what you wanted? I mean, the meeting of minds on this to me is just incredible. It's very it honestly, um and this is really, really, really a stroke your ego on this. It brings to me my the idea of Dark Sun. And what I mean by Dark Sun, I don't mean the setting. I'm talking about when anybody in the role playing community, tabletop role playing community, brings up Dark Sun, they bring up Brahm, the artist that really created the art that feels like Dark Sun, if you understand what I'm saying. And this art to me is the choices, the colors, the um the some of it is sketched. It seems like it's in an old old parchment. Some of it feels like it's ancient, and I mean, I don't know. It just feels like it all goes together. From the landscapes to the imagery, it always feels like it's telling a story. So how did that come about?
So the big secret is Andy is the original father, I should say, of Scavenger. He was making a few years ago. He was making these characters, and he wanted to make a world which at the time he was calling Ziggurat, which he eventually renamed the Scavenger. He, through a twist of good connections, was able to get the idea Scavenger posted up on the D&D website, like the official D&D website. And I saw that, I was like, wow, that looks amazing. I waited about a year and it didn't move whatsoever. There was no news of it. So in classic millennial fashion, I slid in Andy's DMs and I was like, what's going on with this? Andy was very excited to have someone come on and help him kind of flesh out the world. So how it started was I would look at the art and I would think, what is this? What is the culture behind this? What comes from this? And like I said earlier, I was deconstructing his art to build the world around it. And as I would do that, that would, of course, lead to me coming up with new concepts, which then Andy would then go on to draw. And like that, it's a very cyclical, almost like Ouroboros-esque fashion, where he draws something, I write it, I write something, he paints it. And it just so happens that even though we did not know each other at all beforehand, and despite being, big cultural differences and everything, our vision for Scavenger is very uniquely aligned for what we're looking for. And our inspirations too, like Dark Sun, are also very uniquely aligned. Andy himself has met Brahm and talked to Brahm at conventions and everything. So Dark Sun is definitely a big inspiration, as is Planescape for Andy. But we also didn't want to just be like, this is an ode to Dark Sun or Planescape. We wanted to take it to new levels and explore new concepts as well. So as it went on, we started delving into more of the ideas and thinking about what sets Scavenger apart from everything else. What makes Scavenger its own unique world worth considering by its own merits. And over time, we ended up basically fleshing out until we got to Scavenger 1.
Wow. I just it reminds me of the synergy, not just with like Dark Sun. It reminds me of the synergy of all things with the creator of Tales from the Loop, and Things from the Flood,
Yes, very
where
yes.
yeah, where the artwork, well, in that case, the artwork existed. The like this 80s children with like strange technology that escaped and whatnot, and then a game was created to match the imagery. But it seems like in your case that you guys had such a meeting of the mind that it's almost like you're feeding off of each other and going, oh wow, yeah, I feel that. And he makes the artwork based on your words, and your words are given life by the images that he created, and back and forth. That's awesome, dude.
That's exactly what it is. And it's a very fun process. And of course, there's ups and downs as there is with any kind of collaboration and everything. But we are still going strong after 2 years, having finished the PDF and everything and having started the project, really. And it's just been really, I guess, freeing to be able to work with someone who is as talented in terms of visuals as I tend to try to, or as I aspire to be with the written word. So to be able to have him to draw these things and just to look at, like, if you, that one you just passed is probably one of my favorite paintings in the book of the Core City Ruins. I look at that and man, I was like, bro, I can make so much stuff out of that. So
There's uh the movie Dune has just come out. And Denis Villeneuve is the director of the movie, and like, for example, this art piece, that director has such an eye of being able to put like the characters in a position where they're such a small part of the huge image, and you get this expansive look at the world. And he's got an extremely perceptive eye in terms of like explaining the world to the viewer with very little brushstrokes, if that makes sense, right? As opposed to all just close-ups and peoples and faces and things of that nature. And so that's what I see in a lot of his artwork, where not every picture is a main character front and center, but they are a small part of a bigger picture. And
and
go
bringing
ahead,
up
please.
Dune is very important. So Dune is obviously a massive inspiration. Dante announces in the comments in a fantasy Dune. Fantasy Dune is like a big thing that I'm drawing upon here. Before I wrote Scavenger, I literally read all 6 of Frank Herbert's Dune books, which inspired me tremendously in terms of not only writing style, but how to go about it. And in regards to the new Dune movie that just came out, you can very much think of like Scavenger, the first book, as like Dune Part 1, where Dune Part 1 is really just trying to give you the flavor and ideas of Dune to set you up for Part 2, where everything just goes crazy bonkers and you get to the real meat of it, right? So those kinds of ideas are exactly where we're going.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And it's funny too because previously on the channel, when I heard the Dune movie was going to come out, I did a couple of episodes of that. But this week I wanted to revisit it again, Dune, because the movie just came out, and it's getting a lot of high praise. I give it a lot of high praise, and there are little. I know everyone who is a fan of the books. Everyone that's ever a fan of any book ever that gets turned into a movie is like, the book's better, and it's like, of course it's better, because your imagination filled in all the blanks. So you got to cut something out. But that being said, it Dune wasn't the first, but it was the book that combined so many different elements together. The coming of age story, the all the factions, you've got assassination plots, you've got machinations, you've got magical abilities, you've got giant monsters, you've got a dangerous environment. I mean, it's so many things that are all put together into one book, and it was so expansive, like through I mean, the characters go through generations, and then their offspring have their own stories and whatnot. It's pretty incredible. So yeah. Yeah, you gotta like Zabar's like, here we go. Like, yeah, they messed up Jessica. Yeah, listen, there's a couple of characters that you're going like,
Yeah.
but whenever you have to cut a movie, I've heard a movie script is about 200 pages of a novel. That's it. So,
and Dune is a 600 plus page novel, so
yeah, I hear you. I hear you. See, yeah, like, why'd they do that? I get it. And but in the role playing context of it, it allows us to like really take things really far, and I'm really appreciative of that. And it's funny that it was a meeting of the minds. Oh, what did D say? There's a lot of art in this. I like that. In RPG books, it's more disbelief suspending that way. I agree with you on that, there, dude. When I understand that art technically isn't necessary for the rules, because I'm about to ask you a rules question. But I do agree that like art does give you it, like, just as your brain maybe tries to come out, you get pulled right back into it again, And like for yourself with the layout, you have breakout boxes and flavor text and stories and things like that, just to bring you back in just before you leave out a little bit. So I'm really appreciative of that. So now I'm going to ask you more mechanical things. So this is absolutely a 5th edition compatible setting, but what changes or implements or optional rules, house rules, whatever you want to call them, what did you see that did or didn't fit for 5th edition that is available in Scavenger and moving forward?
So I'll start first with Scavenger. Then after that, I'll address kind of the things that we're working on in the future to further elaborate on the rules and stuff. So for Scavenger, there are 6 core minor, well, I'll say minor. There are 6 core streamlined rule changes that I wanted to make for the setting. So some of these kind of fit in together. 3 of them are called extinction saves, battle fatigue, and mandatory healing kits. Extinction saves I took from the Tomb of Annihilation, where it's a DC 15 saving throw. That's because Scavenger, to me, is not only just a lethal and deadly world, it is a difficult world to live in. When you are dying in Scavenger, you are taking some pretty serious damage, and it can impact you pretty hard, which leads to battle fatigue, which is part 1 of a rule. The second part of that is something we're putting in a supplement. Battle fatigue is essentially you get exhaustion when you fall down to 0 hit points. Exhaustion is a very harsh mechanic in 5e, and it's not always wise just to give out exhaustion like that. So we do have some different answers for exhaustion and everything, but the idea of the building up exhaustion in combat also drives home that this is a difficult and desperate world that you're living in. And then there's mandatory healing kits, which is the third part of that, where you have to spend uses of the healing kit in order to get the benefits of a short or long rest, essentially. Because I thought it would make more sense if these non-magical people, inherently the Ocarins, did rely somewhat on medicine in order to kind of get themselves kind of patched up and everything. The other 3 rules changes are ability score proficiency instead of skills, which I took from the DMG and modified. Scavenger is partially old school in some ways, and I wanted to kind of go back to this idea where the ability scores had more uses than just the kind of skill system that Core 5e works with. And by going back to just ability score proficiency, it allowed me to create other things that we have, like in our supplement coming up soon, the Crimson Catalyst, that lets me add in different systems of skills, if you could call it like that, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then there is weaker magic in Akara, but not in Torn. Akara as a non-magical world, Shardstones and everything being foreign. The powers of Shardstones can only go so far in Akara. And then beyond that, you get into Torn, where it's more powerful, of course. And then that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm missing one real quick. Wait, let me double check here. Sorry about that.
No.
Oh, encumbrance. There we go. So I don't really enjoy core 5e encumbrance. I felt like a simple slot-based encumbrance system that's based off your strength score and your intelligence modifier made sense to me. It's very simple. You know, if something's heavy, it takes up 2 slots. If you have more things in your scavenger ruck than your strength score, you're like encumbered at that point. If you have double that, you know, of course, you're totally encumbered. You got to take it off. That's because it is, of course, called Scavenger. And so the things you find and collect as you're going through a car and Torn are very important. And for that importance to be represented mechanically, you have to be able to make sometimes decisions about what you're carrying. It's not really meant for things just like rations or water or what have you, which we just kind of boil into our exploration ideas. It's more about the idea of the magical items or the relics or what you have you or the weapons you're carrying and all that. Those 6 rule changes lead into what, and this is part of what we call the Scavenger Suite. These 6 rules changes lead into what we call Scavenger Paradigms. Scavenger Paradigms were my answer to what are classes like in the Scavenger world. As you said at the beginning of this, D&D is very neo-European, medieval, you know, with paladins and druids. You wouldn't have the term or the idea of a paladin, I was thinking, in Scavenger, where there aren't even really religions or gods. They believe more in mysticisms and ceremonies and things like that. So there are 4 Scavenger Paradigms. A Scavenger Paradigm is represented by 3 different classes that you can pick to represent that paradigm. And then the paradigms in the book also come with 4 archetypes that you can use to flavor it. So the 4 paradigms, which are Drifter, Warlord, Invoker, and Mystic. We'll start with Drifter, you know, the simplest one. That's a Rogue, a Ranger, or a Bard. Okay, so let's say that you are a Drifter. Your archetype is a Bloodsinger. You're someone who has historically in the culture of a car covered and like painted your mouth and your throat and collected songs and kind of spread songs through a car. So Bloodsinger scavengers use shard-based inks to cover their mouth and their throat, which essentially gives them kind of like the voice from Dune, but at a higher, more potent level, right? Or if you're a Drifter, you could be a Farstrider, where you've collected different secrets and wisdoms and techniques from the different tribal mobs of Akara and combined those with Shard Science to kind of enhance your scavenging and everything. So when you make a character, you go through your Scavenger peoples, which you're scrolling through right now. There's 3 different races we have, which are Akarans, humans, Akarans being humans, Kith, and then Mori, which as we scroll down, we'll see more of. And then you pick your paradigm. And then when you pick your paradigm, you would choose your class to represent it, and then the kind of flavor archetype you want to fit to it.
That's awesome. And I like the fact that it's more culturally centered than class focused. Because most people don't walk around. I mean, we use it as shorthand in Dungeons and Dragons, like, hey, I'm a paladin, I'm a barbarian, I'm a druid, but in reality, that's probably far less specified than how people are portrayed in their culture, right? Like, people in a religious order might be a mixture of a number of different things, like clerics and druids and paladins and fighters with a religious bent or something like that. And I appreciate the fact that you have like a cultural focus, and then various classes fit into that focus. That way you could have a number of characters who just are different and still portray themselves to be part of the same group. So I really like
exactly.
that.
I felt it was pretty important that Scavenger as a setting, when you play it, you are exploring the stories of the Scavengers and the stories of Akara as they're intersecting with the world torn apart. So every archetype that belongs to the different paradigms and everything are actual things that existed in a Akaran society before there were ever Shardstones or Torn or all or what have you. So like we have the orphans right here for drifters. The term orphan is not just used in the standard context, but is also used in the context of in Tarnak. An orphan is often essentially a very skilled thief that's a member of the tongue and hand that has been basically ostracized by society. They are literally don't have anyone else, and so they get inducted into that kind of thiefhood and everything, and that leads to being an orphan. Or when we get to warlords, is the bronze bloods, which is basically the term for a mercenary. And once you take that and you add in the intersections with the hyperdimensional and the tone and everything, you start getting these really, or I think, very fun and kind of fresh flavors to look under classes as. Like you have your paladin that could be an oath spear. You have your barbarian that could be a starfeller or a howler or even a bronzeblood and an oath spear too. And playing with these intersections and everything, I think allows you to create a character that makes you feel more immersed in the world itself.
That's awesome. That is cool. I even appreciate the fact that there there are factions and social status amongst like the scavengers and their ability to go back and forth and how they are perceived in the old world versus the crossing into the new world. And um uh, like the ticking time bomb basically of the oncoming apocalypse, where it's on the horizon but people are acting uh in panic situations. People do things in different ways, and I appreciate the fact that like um it's it reminds me of the of watching an apocalypse happen in a movie, and you always have that one person with a suitcase full of money, and we as the viewer looking like that might not be the most important thing you need right now. Maybe you need some food or clothing or like a gun or something. And it reminds me of that, about the different factions and how they relate to each other.
Exactly. We wanted to think about when we were making Scavenger, what is the response to if I told you that you don't know when you're going to die, but you will die soon if you don't do something? What do you do? What solutions do you look for? Of course, some people will be very pessimistic. Some people will be not, I won't say defeated by it. I think that's kind of discounting the trauma that comes from the situation. But some people will essentially not be able to fight back at first. But as they find that hope, and as you get more hope and more desperate, you begin to do these really weird things. And then if you have access to all this crazy mumbo jumbo coming from Torn, it's like, what happens then? What happens when you actually have the ability to kind of warp reality? But in warping reality, you're warping yourself, but you don't have a choice, because if you don't do this, everyone you love will die. Everything you've ever known will be wiped out. And it already is partially wiped out.
That's awesome, dude. I really appreciate it that you've taken the time. Now, okay, this is just a little jealousy on my part. Have you ever decided to go back into your Facebook posts and like gather them all up together and kind of like um edit those out to complete your writing, rather than maybe say starting from new or fresh, or snatching them up and putting them in Google Docs or something like that? Like it's just it like I said, it's amazing how you're able to put so much information down, knowing that you're probably going to kill some of your darlings later on.
So, and this is the only thing I will truthfully brag about. My real superpower is my ability to write a lot of words in a very small amount of time. So, because of that, a lot of the Facebook posts, I don't go back. I've never reused a Facebook post. Sometimes I've grabbed something from a book that I'm working on, and then I've maybe edited it and use it for a Facebook post. But usually the posts are completely original. All the blog series we're currently doing over on our site are all completely original text that won't be in Torn and Beyond, even though they talk about things that are in Torn and Beyond. The main reason I do it like this, other than the fact that I write fast, is because by writing it down the first time, I'm able to then look at it and see what is the better version of this. What is the real gold in this idea, and how can I really tie this into everything else? So I kind of see a lot of these Facebook posts as maybe proto drafts of ideas that won't always be for Scavenger, but usually do work their way into Scavenger. But basically, by looking through these ideas that I've made before, I'll be like, I'm glad I made that, but I think I can do a better version of that now. And then eventually that will somehow, through a feat of magic, turn into a book.
That's it's just amazing. Although I will admit that there are some note takers because I kind of do this where you you write down something not for the purpose of ever looking at it again, but to ingrain it the idea in your head by writing it
Very
down
much
in the
so.
first place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah. I get it.
I find for me too that in the process of actually writing something, I am also simultaneously developing the idea. So I'll start writing something with one perspective with the idea. And by the time I finished it, while I haven't lost the thread, I have polished it or found the nuance in the idea as I was writing it. And that in turn would lead me to be like, I'm glad I did that because now it's in my head. As you said, it's ingrained in there. And now I can do something else with it.
That's awesome. Yeah, Kevin's like the feats are really neat.
Thanks, Kevin.
That's all. Yeah, I'm terrible at 5e mechanics. I don't know why.
It's
It
taken a lot of
bothers me that I'm
years.
so bad at it, and I'm terrible at making feats and things like that. I always have to rely on somebody else to go through all that kind of business. But um, lastly, I will say because, like you said, um, this world is a place for you to explore your ideas. Are you are, for the future? Are you thinking that maybe you'll completely leave these world or the excuse me these locations in your world and go far off um to other locations, meaning like not that you're going to get rid of it or change it or do something completely different. What I mean is that you will creatively sail away from the struggle that these people are going through to go someplace else to tell a different story, maybe.
Yes. So
Okay.
when I was writing the first book, Scavenger, I left a lot of threads for myself to come back to, for both me and Andy to come back to. I think that Scavenger probably will be a long-term project for me and Andy. I want to do a lot with it. I do want to do things like novels with it, short stories. I have a whole bunch of adventures, which is sometimes kind of annoying because it's really just me and Andy, and there's only so much that two people can do. So it'll probably take a while to really get everything out that I want to get out. But there are a lot of ideas, especially now that we're starting to go not just into Torn, but also the greater beyond outside of Torn, that I really want to explore and play with. And that the more I learn and the older I get, the ideas that I have are always kind of like, how will this change my understandings of Scavenger? Or how would this change what Scavenger could be? Or maybe a better way to put it is, how can I add this as a new accent to Scavenger? Or a new idea to explore through the same themes, but a fresh look at everything else? Or even new themes to incorporate into it that ties in to everything else. I think that in the future, I probably will end up doing other fantasy settings as well, or other settings, period. But I think that Scavenger, for me personally, will always be one of the things that I'm always looking to grow more. Kind of in the same way that even into Death with Tolkien, he was thinking about what more can I add to Middle Earth through the Silmarillion or what have you. Or for Frank Herbert, who had outlined his seventh and final book, but has never been able to get to it. But over the course of those 6 books, you travel thousands and thousands of years, right? And see more and more of the idea. So I do want to explore more of the Scavenger setting in the future that we haven't even had a glimpse of so far.
That's awesome. And I could see you leaving and coming back. Maybe much like you said when you write, sometimes you come up with an idea, you have to step away from it and come back to it. And that Scavenger, it's like it it's your baby that you have to leave just a little bit, just so that you can become um it, the absence makes the heart grow fonder in many ways, right?
Exactly.
Oh
I
man.
think after Torn and Beyond, I'm definitely going to need a little break because massive megalith of a book is a lot of energy to take. So that's also kind of another reason we did Skull Boxes. It was a very good refresher for us. Scavenger doesn't have too much cost. Also, bye Zamaria, thank you for coming through. Scavenger doesn't have too much, I would say. It does have lightness in it, but not a whole lot of comedy. So it was good to do Skull Box, where I was able to do something a lot less intense, essentially. And I think going in the future, that kind of not oscillation, but that kind of ups and downs. You know, we do something Scavenger, we play with something else, we come back to Scavenger, will be very integral into making Scavenger into a long-term project.
Awesome. And just as a side note, like I just like the very simple way, but descriptive way how you just changed like you know we have our traditional 5e like items here like the armor materials, and then you have your Bronze Age versions of them. And I think sometimes we tabletop role players get in our head too much, but you know sometimes the simple thing is the best thing. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're just like, listen, this, you know, instead of scale mail we're going to use some ancient bones, and that's what you're using for your armor. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. You don't have to change too much, and you get across the idea, and we get to get into the game really good, and
Exactly.
it's very descriptive and such. I pronounce it chitin, so
It
chitin's
is chitin.
chitin. I
I
like
used to
chitin
say
'cause it's
chitin, and then one of my players corrected me, and I was like, "Whoops! I guess it is chitin." No, I looked it up. I was like, "Wow, it is chitin." So yeah, it would be like a reinforced chitin and all that.
yeah.
The name of the game for 5e is always to kind of be more streamlined. I do have a soft spot in my heart for, you know, the old clunky mechanics for a lot of games and everything. But
Mhm.
while I do bring some of that into Scavenger, I do try to streamline every single rules concept that I introduce. Not only because does that kind of work with 5e's philosophies, but also the world of Scavenger is, to me, a pretty esoteric world. It's a world that I feel like when you first encounter it, though you've seen things reminiscent of it, it itself is kind of more than the sum of its parts. And
Right.
so I didn't want there to be too much mechanical overhead that would kind of keep you from getting immersed into the world, but I still want you to get immersed. So of course they wouldn't have like, you know, plate mail or anything like that, but like the reinforced chitin or the bronze war dresses or copper war dresses and all of that. Those are things that I thought by just switching it over, you get the idea very quickly.
Right. Yeah, I'm picking with the chitinous and chitinous pronunciation because I get that on the channel all the time.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, man.
yeah, somebody throws out a word, and then you get into the whole pronunciation arguments and whatnot, and I'm just like, yeah, but yeah, I'm with you there, Kev. Yeah, cool.
Thanks, guys.
Uh, Pretty nasty to like pick up something made out of like someone's bones or teeth or something, and it's use it as a
Right?
weapon. I
And
love it.
like, so when you think about it, this is what inspired it, man. These people, humans are freaking nuts. We have, if you think about it, even today, everything we wear or make is just made out of either the corpses of other creatures or plants that we find, right? So I was like, back in the Bronze Age, bro, they're not gonna. I mean, everything you have comes from a creature, essentially. You're out here
Yeah.
disemboweling some giant beetle, and every single part of that beetle you have to use somehow, because if you don't, you'll probably die out here. So the idea of just like getting kind of gnarly with it and almost primal in a way, I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
was very resonant with the kind of the origins of humanity.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I love that Bronze Age tribalistic, you know, like you said, primal feel to this world and every yeah, yeah. I'm so into it, dude. I'm so into it. Okay. Um I could show all this stuff off forever, but I got to stop at some point. And I don't want to hold you too late, too much, too often. So let me close this down here. Bam, and boom. Here we go. Says, I was wondering, can we learn the languages of humanoid NPCs and enemies?
Mhm.
Hmm.
So at the beginning of the PDF, I
Yeah.
had maybe a dozen and a half, a baker's dozen languages. I'm also currently in the process of making these like actual conlangs, constructed languages, which I think is very important to really kind of make a world authentic. You can learn these. In fact, when you make a character, you start with a number of these. And then if you want to learn more, because of how it works, kind of how like everyone's kind of been gathered together in the end of days, so to speak, it's very easy to find someone to learn a new language. And many times in your scavenger ring, a scavenger ring being the term we use for like parties, essentially, as scavengers, you're going to be with people who might not speak your language, and you have to learn very quickly how you can communicate with each other. So you have a mixture of languages here that come from city states or from the tribal moms. You have some languages here that are like code languages that were made by factions, like Umbara, for example. And you have some languages that come from Torn, from scripts that we found. And learning these languages is very important to me, at least, to kind of like, immersing yourself a little bit in the deeper. You don't have to, of course. It's kind of like, it's a thing that if you do it, I think that you'll find a lot of fun out of it, I think, once you start really diving into the nuances of the languages.
Well, what I appreciate about the languages just themselves, and I should have pointed this out earlier, is that um, almost every language has a purpose. And languages go beyond like verbal. I mean, we've got, hand signals, and I mean, if technically you could say flags on ships is a language, and the whistles on steam trains are language. In terms of communicating, and we've got smoke signals and bull roarers, and you know, throat singers, and so on and so forth. And I really appreciate that the languages are like based on status, high class, low class status, illegal languages, or those spoken by people who are in the criminal underworld versus those spoken by the upper crust or maybe theater or something. um I I don't mind a role playing game having different languages, but I really appreciate them having a purpose and a reason for existing, whether they're pigeon languages or a
Exactly.
slang or
Hmm.
anything like that, so that when a character uses that language, passersby may they'll have their own responses to the person speaking that
Hmm.
language and understand, hey, this person belongs or maybe they don't belong with
Hmm.
us, or why would you lower yourself to speak this language, or maybe a noble or someone from a high class gives themselves away by being able to speak a particular language that the lower folk don't speak or can't speak, or
Exactly.
maybe
Hmm.
even refuse to do so, to separate themselves. So yeah,
Hmm.
I really appreciate that.
And a lot of this comes from real life as well. I studied a lot of linguistics when I was getting my master's degree. And I learned that essentially language dictates a lot of our own individual reality. The perceptions that we have of the world around us is very much shaped by the languages. So, and then when you look at like even like, medieval Europe, or if you go back to Sumer or all of that, there are so many different languages. If you look at Mesoamerica, right, with the
Mhm.
Aztec Empire, the Triple State Alliance, there are literally hundreds of languages in just that one small region, developed for so many different purposes. So for me, for the world, in order to feel real to me, I felt that, yeah, we needed a lot of languages that had different purposes that you could, use as gameable content, but also just, shows you that this is a real world. This world is one that could have existed theoretically if maybe our planet was a little closer and if a monolith came out of nowhere.
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, and just to kind of non-answer Kevin's question about, so Thurs Fri has its own language. I don't know that it does or does not. So don't. No, no,
Look
no,
at
no, no.
Ribish. Ribish in the book, that's throat singing.
Yeah, but even so, I think drawing so many things from so many world cultures, there's so many amazing things we have on our own planet, from culture and through time and such, that I think we may feel like we have reached our creative limit, but we haven't, because there's so many things out there. And like you said, you're a person who is an avid reader, and that means that you're absorbing information from so many different sources, and each of those writers that has written something down, or maybe a historical thing or whatever, um can just spark something in you and go, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if this thing from 3,000 years ago was combined with this other thing from only 700 years ago, and
Exactly.
it just makes this really cool synergy, and
Mhm.
I'm really appreciative of that, because I have my own, this is my own little armchair desire to get a collection of role playing games that are built around essentially the only way I can really describe it are like niche cultures and cultures of color, basically from different parts of the world. I mean, I have a role playing game that's based on um, ancient aliens. That Planet X is a real place, and it comes into Earth's orbit every something like every 10,000 years, and it's based on like ancient Sumerians and such from that era, as if they really did exist and such. And I was just like, what?
That's a
And
fun idea.
yeah, and it's very much like sandals and laser guns, and it pyramids that are being built in real time and stuff. It's just really weird. And I have another one called Edregor, which is about it's a it's used the game system Fate, but it's based on Native American culture. There's one coming out. The Kickstarter just ended, and it's going to come out. It's called Coyote and Crow. It's another Native
Ooh,
American
saw
one that's
that.
coming out.
Hmm.
And so for and to me, Scavenger fits right there, dude. It's right there. It's up there to me with like the Genesis game system and such. Yeah, it's right there, man. So I'm glad I could talk to you about it.
Thanks, man. I
And
appreciate it.
I hope I didn't derail you if you had a certain thing you wanted to
Oh,
talk about.
no.
So
The only thing I was going to say was that I learned that life is always stranger than fiction, to go back to what you said just before that. And when I learned watching PBS Spacetime that atoms don't actually touch, that changed everything. So, like you said, just seeing these things, I'm like, wow, so that's what reality is, huh? And then that makes it into the book. But the comment on your people of cultures idea, people of color idea, I agree completely. I mean, so I am mixed. I'm half black, half white. A lot of fantasy, as we talked about before, is very Eurocentric. And while there's nothing wrong with Eurocentric fantasy, I love Tolkien, I like Forgotten Realms, I like all that stuff. There is so much more out there on our planet that is just so inspiring. And so, if there's one thing I hope Scavenger really does, is that I hope it shows people that if you just look outside the box that you're used to, you can find so many cool things that will just catapult your creativity and imagination. And I think personally, as you do that, will also help you grow a little bit and help you kind of get a deeper perspective of what it really means to be a living human being. So,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know. I'm just I'm always a glass half full kind of person. I always like to fall more positive than negative or anything. And so I'm always a person that's like just embrace everything and everybody, because they're always going to add more
exactly.
to the game system, and the games that we play in our community, rather than coming up with these artificial, backing into our own little corners and getting tribalistic
Exactly.
about our
Hmm.
game and our hobby and whatnot. And it's like, nah, why do that? you know?
Exactly.
So thank you so much for allowing me. Let me close this down. Allowing me to um, bring this to people who haven't seen it, and also hopefully they will take part and follow along with the Shardstone Assembly and see what greater projects you will be developing. You kind of dangled a little bit about different kinds of media, which I'm not going to press you on that. I'm not a journalist, so I'm not going to press you in the corner to answer that. But I hope to see some things. I know the guys at Tabletop Terrors are trying to spread off into different media as well. Possibly, gaming, maybe television, or movies, or things like that. So maybe we might see something in the future coming out of this as well.
I'm hoping so, and I'm hoping you'll see a lot of different things in the future. Won't say too much right now, but I will say that it would be a shame if Scavenger was only a role-playing book, as good as it is. And I feel like maybe if it was put in some other ways, it would really be an interesting thing to see. Same with Skullbox too.
Okay. All right. Since I was mentioning a bunch of them, I gotta give a shout out to Wagadu. It's a
Ooh, I have that.
Wagadu. Yeah, yeah.
That's
They
great.
put out a free 5e version of their
A whole book.
MMO of an African setting. Anyway, so yeah, I like to shout out to all those creators and now that we're a global community, even in tabletop role playing games, I'm hoping a lot of the people from around the world come up with their own role playing games and their own settings within their own culture and spread it to everybody else. I would love to
Same,
see people
exactly.
from
I
around
would.
the world.
Oh,
That'd
it'd
be
be great.
awesome. So dude, thank you so much. But please, um, give us all the ways we can contact you or where we can find you, and take us out before we leave for the evening.
So you can find our website at shardstone.net. That's shardstone.net. Very simple to go to. There you'll find links to our Discord as well, which you can come out, hang out, talk to us. Kevin, who's been in the chat, is also on my Discord, so we talked to him a good bit. If you want to ask questions about Scavenger or anything, you can find us there. You can also find us on Twitter through shardstone.net and our Facebook page there as well. If you want to reach me personally, usually Facebook or Discord are the best ways. You can get me at Marquise Hardis. I'm pretty liberal with who I add to my friends list. And if you ever want to talk about anything in my DMs or anything, just like I slid into Andy's DMs, feel free to slide into my DMs. They're always open for people who want to talk about stuff. So thank you very much, DBJ, for having me on here. I've known you for so long, man, and we're fellow dreadheads, bro. So it's been a long time coming.
Dude, we've been in each other's orbits for so long,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, in a world of instant satisfaction and everything's got to be quick, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we are also um, we have the long game. We have a
Mm-hmm.
long view of the world, and we see things in the far distance, whether it's next week, month, years
Yeah.
beyond us. And so, yes, I get it. All the young people are like, Facebook is so for the old people, whatnot. But I find it that it's less immediate. It's a greater chance to let an idea
Mm-hmm.
spread and grow rather than just the next
Mm-hmm.
quick hit. And it's a very hard thing to balance when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to be a content creator and you need people's eyes, you need their attention, and
Mm-hmm.
you need it now. You need to garner it when at the same time you're trying to create these like living worlds
Mm-hmm.
that where a person should take part in it over a period of time and such. So,
Exactly.
yeah, dude.
Ooh, how could I forget too? Where you can find both me and DBJ is Absolute Tabletop.
Yeah.
Absolute Tabletop is easily, out of all the communities I've been in, my favorite role-playing game community for tabletop role-playing games. And I post a lot of stuff, a lot of weird things that are very long sometimes in Absolute Tabletop. So if you do like the kind of ideas that I produce, or if you do like Scavenger, you can read a lot more of my ideas by going to the group and just reading my posts. I post about at least once a week, sometimes multiple times a day, depending. So yeah, you can find me there too. But yeah, I feel the same way, DBJ. But it's been great being on here, man. And dude, it's so great talking to you, bro. You're the best.
No problem, dude. And we'll finagle to do this again sometime.
Definitely.
Whether it's another project or maybe something big happens in the community or whatever. We often don't get a chance. We don't see a number of these roundtables as much anymore. So I'd like to even kind of do something like that. And of course, with the creative process, maybe there's something that comes up and we like, just to hash something
Oh,
out
you
live.
know
I don't
it.
care.
You
Yeah.
know
So,
it.
so, but I have to let you go and I have to let the viewers go as well, the people, the participants. So guys, everybody have a great one. Please, peace, love, and prosperity to all. Have a great one. And we